The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was older than most star systems. Its walls were made of crystal that had been grown over 10,000 years, and its ceiling showed the real-time positions of every known world in the galaxy. 300 species had sent their representatives to this place, and for 12,000 years they had governed the stars in relative peace. Today, that peace was about to be shattered by a single warning. Elder moved slowly to the central platform. He was a species so old that they had watched the birth of younger stars. His body was thin and with 4 eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "I come before this council with grave news," said. "We have found a species that must never be contacted. They must never know we exist. They must be isolated forever." The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. In all the history of the council, no species had ever been deemed too dangerous for contact. The whole purpose of the council was to bring civilizations together, to share knowledge and prevent wars. Ambassador of the collective rose from his seat. There were machine-organic hybrids, cold and calculating, and they had little patience for fear. "You speak of quarantine, Elder. For what species? Some ancient war machine, a disease that spreads between stars?" "Neither," replied. "I speak of a young species from a small planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star. They call themselves humans." Laughter echoed through the chamber. Several delegates looked at each other in confusion. "Humans," said the ambassador, a massive creature made of living stone. "We have observed their planet. They have barely reached their own moon. Their technology is primitive. They are short. What possible threat could they pose to the council?" Raised one of his 4 hands, and the holographic display above him came to life. Images began to appear, images that his observation teams had collected over 2 centuries of watching Earth. "Let me show you," he said quietly. The first images showed human wars, terrible, bloody conflicts that had killed millions. The delegates watched with mild disgust but no real concern. Many species went through violent phases before they matured. "They are aggressive," someone called out. "So were the before they joined the council. They learned peace." "Watch," said. The images changed. Now they showed humans rebuilding after disasters, cities destroyed by earthquakes, rebuilt within a decade, populations devastated by disease, recovering within a generation, nations torn apart by war, somehow finding ways to work together again. "Every species faces hardship," continued, "but most species, when pushed to their limits, eventually break. They surrender, they accept defeat, they give up." He paused, and his 4 eyes swept across the assembly. "Humans do not break." More images appeared. Humans climbing the highest mountains on their world, not because there was anything useful at the top, but simply because the mountains existed. Humans diving to the bottom of their deepest oceans in fragile metal shells. Humans strapping themselves to rockets filled with explosive fuel and launching themselves into space. Their first journey beyond their atmosphere was made in a vessel that had a 30% chance of killing its occupants, said. They knew this. They went anyway. When it succeeded, they did not stop to rest. They did not wait for safer technology. They immediately began planning to reach their moon. The chamber had grown quiet now. When 3 of their astronauts became stranded in space with failing life support, their entire species watched together. Millions of humans prayed to gods they weren't sure existed, and the astronauts themselves, faced with almost certain death, remained calm. They worked the problem. They found solutions. They survived. Let the silence stretch before continuing. We have studied their psychology extensively. Every other sentient species we have encountered has a survival instinct that eventually overrides all other concerns. When the odds become too great, they retreat. They surrender. They preserve themselves. This is natural. This is logical. This is how evolution works. He took a slow breath. Humans lack this limitation. When faced with impossible odds, they do not retreat. They attack harder. When told that something cannot be done, they become more determined to do it. When everything is lost, they find reserves of strength that should not exist. The ambassador, a tall being made of shimmering light, spoke up. "You describe courage, Elder. Many species have courage." "No," said firmly. "What I describe is something else entirely. They have courage. They have courage. But even the bravest will eventually accept defeat if the alternative is extinction. Humans will not. They would rather die fighting than live in surrender. And somehow, impossibly, they often win fights they should have lost." He brought up more images. A human military force called the Spartans, 300 soldiers holding a mountain pass against an army of hundreds of thousands. Human pilots in primitive flying machines attacking warships that should have swatted them from the sky. Human civilians standing in front of tanks, armed with nothing but their own bodies and their refusal to move. "They have a concept," said, "that they call going down swinging. It means that even when defeat is certain, they will continue to fight. Not because they believe they can win, but because surrender is simply not something they are willing to consider." The chamber was completely silent now. "If we contact them," continued, "if we give them access to our technology, our knowledge, our resources, there will be no stopping them. They will spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Not because they are evil, but because it is simply their nature to push forward, to explore, to expand, to never accept any limitation." He looked around at the assembled delegates. "And if we ever come into conflict with them, they will not stop until one side is completely destroyed. They do not know how to stop. They cannot be reasoned with once battle begins. They cannot be intimidated. They cannot be frightened into submission. The only way to defeat humans is to kill every single one of them, and even then, I am not certain they would not find some way to keep fighting." The vote took 3 days. Delegates argued, debated, and eventually decided that spheres were exaggerated, but they agreed to a compromise. Warning beacons would be placed around the Sol system, broadcasting in every known language. "Do not approach. Do not engage. Do not make contact." As the session ended, Ambassador approached. "You fear primitives, Elder. When my people reach their system, we will show you how easily they can be conquered." Looked at the ambassador with something that might have been pity. "I pray you never try," he said softly, "because if you do, I fear it will be the end of your collective, not of humanity." Laughed and walked away. 50 years later, he would remember that conversation. He would remember it very clearly, in the few seconds before his flagship was torn apart by weapons that should not have existed. The elders had warned them. None had listened. The warning beacons had stood for 50 years. Ships from 100 different species had passed by the Sol system and seen the ancient messages. Do not approach. Do not engage. The humans on Earth had no idea they were being watched, no idea they had been judged and found too dangerous to contact. Then the collective arrived. Their fleet appeared without warning, 400 ships emerging from faster-than-light travel just beyond the orbit of Mars. The largest vessels were 3 miles long, covered in weapons that could crack planets. The smallest were twice the size of anything humanity had ever built. Commander Hayes was eating breakfast when the alarm reached him. He was 43 years old, a former Air Force pilot who had spent the last decade commanding the orbital defense station called Sentinel. In all that time, nothing had ever happened. Sentinel was supposed to be a precaution, a just-in-case measure against threats that nobody really believed would come. Now the biggest threat in human history was sitting on his doorstep. "Talk to me," said as he reached the command center, still holding his coffee cup. Lieutenant Maria Costa turned from her console, her face pale. 412 ships, sir. They're not responding to any communication attempts. All we're getting is a repeating message." "Play it." The speakers crackled, and then a cold, mechanical voice filled the room. Surrender your biological resources. Resistance is inefficient. Surrender your biological resources. Resistance is inefficient. Stood very still for a moment. Then he took a sip of his coffee. Get me Admiral Santos at Fleet Command, and I want Doctor on a shuttle up here within the hour. Sir, the Admiral is already on the line. He's ordering all ships to hold position and wait for further instructions. Looked at the screen showing the alien fleet. It was moving slowly toward Earth, like a predator that knew its prey had nowhere to run. Tell the Admiral I received his orders, then get me Doctor. Was 57 years old, and she had spent the last 20 years of her life working on something that most scientists said was impossible. She called it the disruption field, a way of manipulating the fabric of space itself. The theory had come to her in a dream when she was 32. The proof had taken 15 years. The prototype had been built in her garage. When she arrived at Sentinel, she looked like she hadn't slept in days, probably because she hadn't. The field generator isn't ready, she said before could even speak. I've told the government this 100 times. If we activate it now, there's a 60% chance it tears our own ships apart along with theirs. And what's the chance it works correctly? Paused, maybe 40%. Nodded slowly. He looked at the screen, where the alien fleet was now close enough for their individual ships to be visible. Each one bristled with weapons. Those ships are going to reach Earth in about 16 hours, he said quietly. If they're asking for biological resources, they're not here to talk. They're here to harvest us. He turned to face. I'll take 40%. The next few hours were the most intense of Hayes's life. He ordered 12 ships, the fastest and most maneuverable in Earth's fleet, to be fitted with field generators. The captains who volunteered knew the odds. They also knew what would happen to their families if the aliens reached Earth. Not a single captain hesitated. Captain Danny Reeves was 31 years old, and he had never expected to die in space. He had joined the fleet to see the stars, to explore, to discover. Now he was strapped into the pilot seat of a destroyer called Relentless, waiting to fly directly into an enemy fleet that outnumbered them 35-1. Final checks complete, his engineer reported. The field generator is online. Doctor says to activate it when we're within 1 mile of their largest ship. Danny looked at his crew. 7 people, all of them young, all of them scared, all of them ready. Let's go introduce ourselves, he said. The collective had conquered 47 worlds. They had assimilated billions of beings into their machine-organic network. They had perfected the art of war over thousands of years. Their tactical algorithms calculated every possible outcome of every battle, and they never engaged an enemy unless victory was certain. Their algorithms told them that the 12 tiny human ships approaching their fleet posed no meaningful threat. The calculations said that human weapons were too weak, human ships too fragile, human tactics too primitive. The algorithms were wrong. Danny Reeves flew Relentless straight into the heart of the formation, weaving between weapons fire that should have destroyed him a dozen times over. His crew was screaming coordinates, adjustments, warnings. He heard none of it. All he could see was the enemy. Field activation in 3, 2, 1. The universe screamed. Reality itself seemed to twist around the ships as the disruption field activated. Metal that had been forged in the hearts of stars bent like paper. Ships that had crossed galaxies crumpled like tin cans. The collective consciousness felt something it had not experienced in 3,000 years. Fear. 17 minutes. That was how long the battle lasted. 17 minutes to destroy 280 ships. 17 minutes to break the greatest military force in the known galaxy. 8 of the 12 human ships survived. Danny Reeves brought Relentless home with half his hull missing and 3 of his crew dead. When he landed, he didn't say a word. He just sat in his chair and stared at nothing. The remaining ships fled. They did not stop to collect their dead. They did not send a message. They simply turned and ran as fast as their engines could carry them. Across the galaxy, monitoring stations recorded what had happened. Species that had trembled at the mention of the collective watched in stunned silence as the humans sent their victory broadcast. "This is Commander Hayes of Earth Defense Station Sentinel. To whoever sent this fleet, we did not ask for war. We did not want war, but if you come to our home with weapons drawn, we will defend ourselves. The next fleet you send will meet the same fate. We are humanity. We do not surrender." In the ancient council chambers, Elder watched the recording 3 times. His 4 eyes were dark with emotion that the younger species could not read. "The warning beacons," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "We placed them to protect humans from the galaxy." He turned to face the assembled delegates, many of whom were still staring at the screen in disbelief. "We were wrong. The beacons were meant to protect the galaxy from humans." The ambassador's seat was empty. His entire delegation had fled back to their home system, desperate to warn their collective of what was coming. They didn't understand yet. None of them did. This was not the end of humanity's first war. It was only the beginning. News of the defeat spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Within days, every species in the council knew what had happened. 12 primitive ships had destroyed nearly 300 of the most advanced warships in existence. The collective, which had terrorized the galaxy had been broken in 17 minutes. Some species celebrated. That had been their greatest fear, and now that fear was gone. But others looked at the recordings from the battle and felt a different kind of terror growing in their hearts. Ambassador of the Dominion called the emergency session. There were beings of pure energy, ancient and powerful, and they had ruled their section of the galaxy for 8,000 years. Himself was over 1,000 years old, and he had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. "We face a crisis greater than the ever posed," he said, his energy form flickering with agitation. "These humans have revealed themselves to be exactly what Elder warned us they would be: unpredictable, unstoppable, dangerous beyond measure." The council chamber was packed. Every species had sent their most senior representatives. Even species that had not attended in centuries had emerged from isolation to witness this moment. "They defeated the with technology they invented in a single generation," continued. "Their ships were held together with primitive materials. Their pilots had no neural enhancements, no collective consciousness, no combat algorithms. They won through nothing but raw determination and their refusal to accept defeat." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Now imagine what they will become in 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years. If we do not act now, they will spread across this galaxy like a disease, and nothing will stop them." The ambassador, massive and ancient, rumbled his agreement. "They were our shield against such threats. With them broken, humanity has no natural predator. They will expand unchecked." "Then we must become their predator," said. "I propose the formation of a coalition. Every species that values peace and stability will join together. We will surround the Sol system. We will ensure that not a single human ship escapes their home world. And if they resist—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. The vote was swift. 18 species joined the coalition of purity within the first day. More joined in the following weeks. By the time the coalition fleet assembled, 34 species had contributed ships, weapons, and resources to the cause. Elder refused to participate. From the council entirely, retreating to their ancient and sealing themselves away. Before he left, sent a single message to the coalition leadership. "You have made a terrible mistake. I warned you about humans because I hoped contact could be avoided. Now you are forcing the very conflict I feared. When you push humans, they do not retreat. They push back harder. You cannot win this war. You can only choose how badly you wish to lose." The coalition ignored him. Their first target was a small human colony called New Providence. It was a mining outpost on a distant moon, home to 3,000 settlers, families, children, people who had left Earth seeking new opportunities and adventures among the stars. The Coalition fleet arrived without warning. 47 ships surrounded the small moon, and they opened fire before a single evacuation shuttle could launch. 3,000 humans died in less than an hour. The Coalition broadcast images of the destruction across all frequencies, making sure that humanity would see what happened to those who tried to spread beyond their home. Captain Danny Reeves received the news aboard the Relentless. He had become something of a hero after the battle, promoted twice and given command of a small squadron. Now he stood on his bridge, watching the footage of New Providence burning, and something changed inside him. "They killed children," he said quietly. His voice was calm, almost peaceful, but his crew knew him well enough to hear the rage underneath. Lieutenant Maria Costa stood beside him, her own eyes wet with tears she refused to shed. "Command is ordering all ships to fall back to Earth orbit. They want to negotiate." Danny was silent for a long moment. On the screen, the last images from New Providence showed a playground, twisted and melted by plasma fire. A child's toy floated in the debris. "How many Coalition ships hit New Providence?" he asked. 47 confirmed, sir." "And how many are still in that system?" Maria checked her readings. "All 47. They're holding position, probably waiting for reinforcements before pushing toward Earth." Danny turned to face his crew. 7 faces looked back at him, waiting. "The Coalition just murdered 3,000 of our people because they're afraid of what we might become," he said. "They think if they hurt us enough, we'll surrender. They think if they kill enough of our children, we'll give up." He smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "They don't understand us at all." He activated the fleet-wide communication channel. His voice reached every human ship in the system. "This is Captain Danny Reeves. I'm taking my squadron to engage the Coalition fleet at New Providence. Command hasn't authorized this mission. They don't need to. Those were our people, our families, our children, and I will not let that go unanswered." He paused. "I know the odds. 47 enemy ships against my 17. I know most of us probably won't come back. But I also know that every ship I destroy is one less ship that can threaten Earth. One less ship that can murder innocents. One less ship crewed by creatures who think they can break us with fear." The responses came flooding in. Not a single ship refused. The Battle of the Belt began 6 hours later. Coalition commanders watched in confusion as the tiny human fleet approached their position. Their tactical computers calculated the engagement and predicted overwhelming Coalition victory. The humans were outnumbered and operating far from any support. But the computers didn't understand humans. Danny Reeves used the asteroid belt as a weapon. He hid his ships behind massive rocks, then used precise timing to catch enemy vessels in crossfires they couldn't escape. He had his damaged ships play dead, then spring back to life when enemies approached. He coordinated his fleet through quantum-link communications that the Coalition couldn't intercept or jam. Most importantly, he refused to fight the battle the Coalition expected. Every time they thought they had him cornered, he found a way out. Every time they thought they understood his tactics, he changed them. 6 hours. That was how long it took for Danny Reeves and 17 human ships to destroy 39 Coalition vessels. He lost 4 of his own, but the survivors escaped to tell the story. Across the galaxy, military analysts studied the recordings with growing horror. Human tactics didn't follow any recognizable pattern. Human commanders made decisions that no algorithm could predict. Human crews performed acts of coordination that should have been impossible without neural links or collective consciousness. "They don't fight like any species we've encountered," the general reported to his superiors. "They adapt too quickly. They improvise too effectively. Our computers cannot model their behavior because they don't follow probability curves. They simply refuse to accept tactical realities. The coalition had expected to win the war within months. 7 years later, they were still fighting. And losing. 7 years of war had changed everything. The coalition that had started with 34 species had grown to include over 50, each one contributing ships and resources to the effort to contain humanity. They had burned human colonies, destroyed supply lines, and killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. And still, humanity would not break. For every world the coalition destroyed, humans colonized 3 more. For every fleet assembled against them, humans found ways to scatter it. They fought with a fury that all rational analysis, and they refused to consider surrender no matter how badly the odds stood against them. But not everyone in the galaxy saw humanity as a threat. Was a young scientist, barely 200 years old by her species standards. She had grown up on stories of elders' warnings about humans, and she had believed every word. Humans were monsters. Humans were dangerous. Humans would destroy everything they touched. Then her research station was caught in a crossfire between human and coalition forces. The station was neutral territory, studying a rare type of star that existed nowhere else in the galaxy, and her team of 12 researchers had nothing to do with the war. But when coalition ships fled through their system with human vessels in pursuit, the station became a target. Coalition ships fired on the station as they passed, using it as cover. Human ships returned fire, and in the chaos, the station took critical damage. Life support began failing. 3 of S's colleagues were killed instantly. She expected to die. She expected the humans to either ignore her distress signal or, worse, finish what the coalition had started. Instead, a human ship broke off from the chase and approached her station. Captain Jenny was 35 years old, with short dark hair and tired eyes that had seen too much death. She commanded a patrol vessel called Swift, and she had spent the last 3 years hunting coalition ships across this sector. "We're receiving a distress signal," her sensor operator reported. "It's coming from that research station. Multiple life signs but fading." Jenny looked at the screen. The coalition ships were getting away. If she stopped to help the station, she would lose them. She ordered Swift to turn toward the station anyway. "Ma'am," her first officer asked, confused. "Those are civilians," Jenny said simply. "They need help. The coalition can wait." Watched in disbelief as the human ship docked with her station. When the airlock opened, she expected soldiers with weapons drawn. Instead, she found medics carrying supplies and engineers already scanning the damage. And leading them was a human woman who looked at not with hatred or suspicion, but with concern. "Are you hurt?" Jenny asked. Could not speak. She simply stood there, her 4 eyes wide with shock, as humans rushed past her to help her dying colleagues. The rescue took 6 hours. Human medics saved 4 of the 9 surviving. Human engineers repaired enough of the station to keep life support running until proper help could arrive. And through it all, Jenny stayed by S's side, answering her questions and treating her with kindness she had never expected. "Why?" finally asked. "We are enemies, your coalition. My species joined it. We voted to contain your people. Why would you help us?" Jenny was quiet for a moment. She looked out the station's viewport at the stars. "A long time ago on our world there was a war, a terrible war that killed millions. When it was finally over, the winners had a choice. They could punish the losers, keep them weak, make sure they could never threaten anyone again." She paused. "They chose differently. They helped rebuild. They offered friendship instead of revenge, and the former enemies became the strongest allies." She turned to face. "The coalition thinks we're monsters because we don't know how to give up. But that same stubbornness means we don't know how to hate forever either. You needed help. We could help. That's all that matters." Was released after 2 weeks. During that time, she had countless conversations with Jenny and her crew. She learned about human history, human culture, human values. She learned about their art and their music and their dreams. And she learned that everything she had been told about humans was wrong. When returned to space, she carried recordings of everything she had experienced. She showed the elders how humans had risked their lives to save their enemies. She described the kindness she had received, the respect, the compassion. Most importantly, she showed them a message that Jenny had given her before she left. "I don't know if this will matter," Jenny had said in the recording. "I don't know if your people will believe you, but I want them to understand something. We're not fighting this war because we want to. We're fighting because we have to. The coalition decided to destroy us and we refuse to be destroyed. But if they stopped tomorrow, if they offered peace instead of extinction, we would accept it. We would forgive. We would build something new together." She had paused, and her tired eyes had shown something that looked almost like hope. "Humans are stubborn. We don't give up even when we should, but that means we don't give up on peace either. We keep trying. We keep hopping. We keep believing that someday, somehow, things can get better." She had smiled slightly. "Tell your elders that. Tell them the monsters they're so afraid of just want to live in peace." The recording spread across space, and then, slowly, it began to spread beyond. Other species started questioning the coalition's narrative. Refugees from human-held territories told stories of being treated with dignity and care. Human diplomats, operating under impossible conditions, kept reaching out with offers of negotiation. A commander who had been captured by human forces was returned to his people unharmed, with a letter from the human admiral who had defeated him. The letter simply said, "We are not your enemies unless you force us to be." Cracks began to appear in the coalition. Species that had joined out of fear started wondering if they had made a mistake. The formally from the war effort, the declared neutrality. 17 other species quietly began trade negotiations with human worlds. Ambassador of the watched the coalition crumble with growing fury. "They are tricking us," he insisted at every council meeting. "This kindness is a weapon. They show mercy now so they can destroy us later." But fewer and fewer species believed him. The war continued, but something fundamental had changed. Humanity was no longer fighting alone, and slowly, one act of kindness at a time, they were proving that the elders had been wrong about one thing. Humans were unstoppable, yes, but they could absolutely be trusted. 20 years had passed since the first ship appeared near Earth. 20 years of war, death, and destruction. 20 years that had transformed humanity from a primitive species, barely reaching beyond their home world, into a galactic power that made ancient civilizations tremble. But nothing lasts forever, not even war. Admiral Grace stood on the bridge of the flagship Unity and watched the Coalition's final fleet assemble above their capital world of Prime. She was 53 years old, daughter of the legendary doctor who had invented the disruption field that started it all. She had spent her entire adult life fighting a war she had never wanted. Today, she intended to end it. "Report," she said quietly. Commander Pete Collins, her tactical officer, pulled up the holographic display. "Coalition fleet is in defensive formation. 4,200 ships. It's the largest force they've ever assembled." Grace nodded slowly. She had 1,800 human vessels and another 1,400 from allied species. They had sent observers. They had contributed 100 warships. 17 other species, former coalition members who had seen the truth about humanity, now stood beside them. By any rational calculation, they were still outnumbered. The coalition had more ships, bigger weapons, better positions. Their defensive grid around Prime was the most sophisticated ever built. But Grace had never believed in rational calculations. Neither had her mother. "Open a channel," she said. "All frequencies, every language." The communication officers scrambled to obey, and Grace stepped forward to face the broadcast camera. Behind her, through the viewport, the enemy fleet glittered like a field of stars. "This is Admiral Grace of the United Earth Federation. I am addressing the Coalition of Purity and everyone who stands with them." She paused, gathering her thoughts. 20 years ago, you decided that humanity was too dangerous to exist. You heard elders' warnings about our determination, our refusal to surrender, our ability to overcome impossible odds. And instead of seeing those qualities as potential virtues, you saw them as threats. The channel was silent. Across 4,000 ships, beings of every imaginable shape and form listened. You attacked us without provocation. You murdered our civilians. You burned our colonies and slaughtered our children. You did everything in your power to break us, to make us give up, to prove that your fears were justified. Grace's voice remained calm, almost conversational, but everyone listening could hear the steel underneath. You failed, not because we're monsters, not because we enjoy war. You failed because Elder was right about one thing: humans don't know how to surrender. When you push us, we push back. When you hurt us, we get stronger. When you tell us something is impossible, we do it anyway. She took a slow breath. But was wrong about something too. He said we couldn't be trusted. He said our nature made us too dangerous to ever live in peace with other species. He was wrong. We've spent 20 years proving him wrong. Every refugee we sheltered, every prisoner we returned unharmed, every hand we extended in friendship, even when it was slapped away. Grace stepped closer to the camera. "So here is my offer, the only offer you will receive. Surrender now and we will show you mercy. Your worlds will not burn. Your children will not die. Your species will not be erased. We will build something together, something better than fear and hatred. We will prove that the qualities that make us unstoppable in war can also make us unshakable in peace." She let the silence stretch for a long moment. "Or fight, and learn the final lesson about humanity. Learn why the elders warned you. Learn why the collective fled screaming into the void. Learn what happens when you push us too far and leave us no choice but to end you." She straightened. "You have 1 hour to decide. Choose wisely." The channel closed. Grace stood motionless, watching the enemy fleet through the viewport. "Do you think they'll surrender?" Pete asked quietly. "Some of them will," Grace replied. "The ones who've been paying attention. The ones who've seen what we're capable of both in war and in peace." She paused. "The won't. They've invested too much in this war. Their pride won't let them back down." She was right. Over the next hour, ship after ship in the Coalition fleet powered down their weapons and broadcast surrender codes. Species that had joined the Coalition out of fear, who had watched humanity's mercy toward prisoners and refugees, decided they had been on the wrong side. But 400 ships remained defiant. Ambassador broadcast his own message, calling humanity liars and manipulators, insisting that surrender meant extinction. The battle began at exactly the 1-hour mark. It was brutal. They were ancient, powerful, and fighting for their survival. They had weapons that could tear through shields like paper and defensive systems that had taken to perfect. They fought with the desperation of a species that believed it was facing extinction. Grace did not fight like someone facing extinction. She fought like someone who had already won, and was simply completing the final steps of a plan laid out years ago. Human ships moved in perfect coordination, exploiting weaknesses that they didn't know they had. Allied vessels provided covering fire and support. The disruption fields that had broken, though, were now refined, precise, devastating. 3 hours. That was how long it took to break the fleet. When Ambassador was brought aboard Unity in chains, Grace met him personally. He expected execution, torture, the kind of treatment the Coalition would have given any captured human leader. Instead, Grace offered him a chair and a cup of tea. "I don't understand you," said, his energy form flickering with exhaustion and confusion. You have one. You could destroy my people now. Why don't you? Grace sat across from him, sipping her own tea. Because that's not who we are, she said simply. Your coalition spent 20 years trying to prove that humans were monsters. You burned our worlds, killed our families, did everything you could to bring out the worst in us. She set down her cup. But here's the thing about humans. We get to choose who we are, not our instincts, not our anger, not our pain, us. She met his eyes, if the shifting points of light in his energy form could be called eyes. I could hate you. Part of me does hate you for everything you've done, but I refuse to let that hate define me. I refuse to become the monster you were so afraid of, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that humanity can be trusted with power, not because we're perfect, but because we choose to be good. Was silent for a long time. The elders warned us about you, he finally said. I know, they said we were unstoppable, they said we couldn't be trusted. Grace smiled slightly. They were half right. 50 years later, the Galactic Council gathered once more. The hall had been rebuilt, expanded to accommodate dozens of new species. Humanity had a permanent seat now, right in the center of the chamber. Elder Ancient Beyond Measure rose to speak one final time. I warned this council about humans, he said, his voice echoing through the vast space. I said they were unstoppable. I said they couldn't be trusted. I was right about the first thing. He paused, and something that might have been a smile crossed his aged features. I have never been happier to be wrong about the second. The council erupted in applause. Ambassador Lily, great-granddaughter of Captain Jenny who had saved life all those years ago, rose to accept humanity's formal recognition as a council member. We were feared, she said simply. We were hated. We were told we didn't belong among civilized species, but we kept reaching out anyway. We kept showing mercy when we could have shown rage. We kept offering friendship when we were given only hatred. She looked around at the assembled delegates, species that had once tried to destroy her people. The elders warned you about humans. They said we were unstoppable, and they were right. But they didn't understand what that really meant. It doesn't just mean we won't stop fighting when threatened. It means we won't stop hopping. We won't stop trying to build a better future. We won't stop believing that peace is possible, even when everyone tells us we're fools. She smiled, and it was warm and genuine. That's what makes us human. Not our stubbornness in war, but our stubbornness in peace. And we will keep being stubborn until every species in this galaxy understands that we were never the monsters the elders feared. The chamber fell silent. Then Elder rose one more time. He walked slowly, painfully, to where Lily stood, and in front of the entire Galactic Council, he extended his hand in the human gesture of friendship. Welcome, he said, to the family. The elders had warned them about humans. They said humans were unstoppable. They were right. But they forgot to mention that humans were also kind. And in the end, that made all the difference.